this is our the next session in our Fellows in Focus. I think it's our fourth one here. So we have Karan Ramakrishna here, and our opportunity here is to get to know you, more than just our time on the wards, and give you it'll be a lot about your career paths and your upbringing and things like that. But there'll be some fun questions mixed in, and should be low key and relaxed here. And so to get started, I want to hear about your upbringing and kind of leading into how you chose to pursue medicine.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up the youngest of three brothers. I was raised in Bangalore in the south of India. And so it was very boisterous house growing up. Feel bad for my mom. But I think to some extent, in terms of interest in medicine growing up, I had a sense, I think, early on. It's not I'm not entirely sure why I don't have a great origin story, but I think some great role models as physicians. And some of my older cousins and uncles and stuff, and we had this like sort of an old timey family doctor, Dr. Murthy, who I went to as a kid, who my parents saw, who saw like all my friends in my neighborhood. And he was just like a great presence. And every time I went there, even though often it's just like a you or I didn't do too much, but I think just having that sort of, I saw the value of a therapeutic relationship and making those connections. And he always had cool stories, and I think he heard a lot of cool stuff. And I think being part of the community that way and making a meaningful impact, it spoke to me as a kid. So I think I had a sense that that's something that I wanted to do growing up. And I think I was interested in science and biology. My parents were both biologists by training, and so the home environment, I did pretty. I liked it in school, and so it sort of just fit for me. And so I'm very grateful to be in medicine. And yeah.
Yeah, so you had a lot of science growing up. Did your brothers pursue medicine or something in the sciences as well?
No, not medicine, not biological sciences. My older brother was really into like robotics growing up, and like he is
Okay.
now a robotics engineer who works on like self-driving cars and autonomous vehicles.
Awesome.
And my twin brother works more on the software side. He works for a tech company. And so yeah, they're not in medicine, but sort of in the science field. Yeah.
Got it. So you said twin brother. So was so did
Yes.
he but you said you were the youngest, so did he come out a little bit ahead?
Yes, he's 5 minutes older, and he never let me forget
He
it.
never let you forget. Got it.
It's very hierarchical in that house. So
Got
yeah,
it.
but it's different. It's because we're very different personalities. He's far more outgoing, outdoorsy, all that stuff, and so.
Got
But
it.
never interested in doing medicine, and so it's like it's just interesting when we hang out. It's like we sort of talk about our different work and our different fields. It's kind of cool. It's kind of fun.
I was going to say it can otherwise feel very tunnel vision. I grew up, I'm the oldest of three boys, but in my case, we all ended up in the medical field.
Oh, that's awesome.
And my dad, my youngest is a pharmacist, my dad is a pharmacist, and my middle brother is a neurosurgeon. So we're
Okay.
all in
Oh,
this medical field. So, but you're right, getting out of that world is of high value.
for sure.
Otherwise, it just consumes you.
Yeah, for sure.
How'd you get interested in hematology oncology?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it had to do with like some like formative experiences in medical school and in residency. Um, in India, you do final year of your med school is an internship here, a house staff year essentially, and you work in different medical units. And I ended up being assigned to the medicine heme unit, which managed all their chemo patients and all their hematology patients. And so sort of like firsthand experience of that made me really excited about it. We take people's blood smears down to the lab, look at smears of like diagnosed with leukemia, and then we'd start them on chemo. So it felt very real, it felt very visceral, where you could look at, sort of, you look at the slide, you look at the cell, and then you know the disease, and you can bring to bear, all that you've learned about it and treat it. So that felt very, real, visceral to me, and it's just very super interesting. And so that was sort of the base in med school, and then in residency, I did my residency training in upstate New York in Syracuse, and they had a great hemonc team there. The residents essentially ran the hemonc services, and so there's a lot of exposure, obviously. And I think one thing I knew in residency was, like, I think towards the middle, I figured out that I want to take care of people with serious illness. So I was thinking of either ICU or hemonc, and I think spending some time on the hemonc wards and then doing hemonc clinic, where you actually saw sort of long-term follow-up care, and you saw, like, folks with stage 4 lung cancer who've been doing great on single agent immunotherapy for like 5 years. I think that really changed my perspective into what we can do in this space and how far we're progressing. And so yeah, that's a big reason why I went into hemonc.
Yeah, you're right. Like seeing the science, like under, on this still slide, but knowing that that is signaling essentially a total body disease is, when you think about it, it's pretty amazing. So,
Yes.
so did you have
And
any
it's still,
ties?
we still do it every day. So I think still very
Yeah, exactly. Did you have any ties to Minnesota before you came?
Yes. So my med school has an exchange program with the EU, and so I actually came here in my final year of med school to do like 2 months of electives. And so I stayed in Dinkytown, like student housing, and then I did like 2 months of electives, one of which was hematology. And I spent like 3 weeks, I think it was 2 weeks with Dr. Dada, actually. She was on service there.
Okay.
And I loved it, just, I really loved the way the approach here in the US. I think it's very academic, very evidence-based. And there's a lot of like just, I think there's less dogma compared to a lot of other places. And I think there's this constant, I think, reflective care, which I really like and something that I really want to be a part of. So yeah, I really loved my time in Minneapolis, although I came in like late February, mid-March. So it was a bit of a climate shock for me coming from a tropical country. But then I got to see a little bit of your spring and summer, and it was just beautiful. And I really liked Minneapolis. So, and I was considering fellowship. This is one of the first places I wanted to apply to.
Yeah, it's good. And I do think as regardless of which section you're in within our division, I think that effort to ensure academic drive related to the science and question, in many cases making sure that the science backs our plan, or questioning it if it is dogma. I think that regardless of where you go within our division, I think that is certainly at the baseline, that we're all
it's
we're all
really
humble to a point that we feel expert in what we're doing, but not so but humble enough to know that we don't know everything.
Yes.
So you are deep into the research years. Tell us about your research and what got you into it, and what is your current core project look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really interested in immunotherapy, and especially immunotherapy response and the biomarkers of immunotherapy response. And so, it's, I think, despite, a decade or more of, using immunotherapy in the real world setting, we're still not clear on what predicts immunotherapy response. Yes, PD-L1 to some extent, TMB levels, etc., but it's not really clear. And so that's really fascinating for me. I think it's a cool space to do more work in. Dr. Kratsky's lab has done a lot of translational work with one of the biomarkers called ADAR1, adenosine deaminase against RNA. And so essentially it's considered, sort of keep it simple, but it's considered an immunotherapy inhibitory checkpoint. So it inhibits your body's immune system innately sensing some of the tumor ligands. And so they found that in rat models, without the ADAR1 gene, they tend to overcome immune checkpoint inhibitor resistance. And so it might be a potential biomarker. So what some of the work that I'll be doing over my research years with Dr. Kulkarni and Dr. Kratsky is to look at it in the clinical setting and look at our immunotherapy database and look at this molecule and see if there was a difference in outcomes based on the presence or the absence of this molecule. So I think that's what I'll be
more like a
on.
biomarker of resistance to.
Exactly.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and that's different. I mean, certainly that's not that way of thinking is not per se, in and of itself novel, but we're usually looking at biomarkers to target, and in this case,
Right.
it's a biomarker of this drug probably isn't going to work. But I
Right.
like how you're doing it clinically because you can do it in a drug database, right? In a wet lab, but it doesn't always pan out clinically when it's got to be
Yes.
in
Yeah.
vivo, and the other constituents of a genome are playing a role as well.
Exactly. And we're just sort of hoping to get some, is there any signal here in the real world setting as to whether this can be impactful or not? So
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Who would you, whether it's in the research realm, clinically, or even going back to when you're younger, who do you consider your mentors, and how have they helped you mold yourself into who you are today?
I think, big mentor, when I think of my mentors, I think, big presence was one of my professors in internal medicine during residency, Dr. Amit Damoon. He was just, I consider him my Dumbledore essentially. And, he's an MD PhD. He had a strong background in, basic science cardiology stuff. But he was essentially did a lot of work with residents and is really, really passionate about like medical education and teaching. And he would run the best rounds that I've ever seen in all my years of training. Just really passionate about like really sitting and talking to patients and really getting that old school, getting the history and focusing not so much on the EMR, but talking to them and sort of figuring out between us what's actually going on. And then he'd do these sessions where, we'd talk to a patient, describe the symptoms, and come out, we look at the EKG, and he'd talk at the basic level, and he'd put it across very simply. Sometimes there's so much jargon and so much
Yeah,
extra stuff, but he had this way of making the science of it really simple and very manageable and very joyful. And I think he helped me, I think in the middle of residency, you're at this phase where you're like trying to be efficient and get through notes and get through admissions. He sort of helped rediscover some of that joy of medicine. And so that's something I'm very grateful for. And he's someone I worked with very closely during my chief year when we worked on building a QI curriculum for our residents, and he really encouraged me in teaching and how to express sort of some of your creative skills in teaching medicine and sometimes certain diet topics and how you can do that better and engage people, and that made a huge impact. And so he's a big mentor for me.
I love it. I love it. I presume you don't want to be a fellow forever. What are you looking at doing post fellowship?
It's long term. I'm still trying to figure it out, but I think I want my clinical work to be front and center. I'd love to pursue my interest in the immunotherapy space and looking at biomarkers and immunotherapy related toxicity and stuff. But at the same time, I'm hoping to work in an academic or an academic adjacent like community hybrid setting where I can focus to some extent on one disease group, also see other stuff if I need to, but primarily to be involved in teaching and hopefully involved in some systems work, which is something that I'm interested in long term. So it feels a little entitled to ask for all of that, but I think our field is and oncology heme practices are like evolving so quickly. I think it's a matter of finding our path through this. So I'll try to figure it out.
Yeah, I'm evidence that you can ask for and get most of what you want. If you find your niche and you know that it's a needed, something that the division values and needs, you can usually ask and get those key points that I think in most respects what you want to get out of it is something that you enjoy doing, right? There's work.
Absolutely.
Every day isn't the best, but something where you can always go back to and say, I see value in what I'm doing and it's adding value to my life and hopefully others as well. And the reality is you won't get it necessarily if you don't ask. So the worst they can tell you is no.
Yes, absolutely.
If you were to project out then even further, like
Yes.
10 years down the road, where you've got you figured out your faculty position, what do you see yourself doing? In other words, are you a physician scientist? Are you a clinical trialist or education driven? Where do you think you could see yourself?
Yeah, I think, some things might change, but really at this point, when I see myself 10 years from now, I would like to be in a clinician educator role. I think that's something that I'm passionate about, and it would, I think it would be a good fit, and I'd love doing that.
Yeah, I think you'd be excellent in that role for sure. And you're incredibly thorough. So the value that you bring to making sure that no stone is left unturned, I think really helps with education, because it gives you that one, it gives you that perspective of a trainee that there's always something more to look at. But two, you're incredibly patient, and so you can work with that the range of trainees as they come. So we've talked a lot about work, but there's obviously, you got to have balance. Whatever work-life balance means for you. What do you enjoy doing outside of work, and what brings you value there?
So I think at least during training, I think sometimes we get a little bit into our head. So I really like running as a way to sort of get out of that and sort of get in a good mind space. It just feels great, and that's one of the things I love about Minneapolis and living sort of close to the U, and I live in Northeast, is that it's so walkable, and there's so many places nearby that I run by the river, and so it's a great way for me to really clear my head and just like take in the city and be more mindful. So I love doing that. Big reader, growing up as a big science fiction fantasy nerd, but I still read a little bit of science fiction. But I think right now it's a lot of like history and nonfiction and stuff like that. Big fan of horror movies, so we try to do horror movie nights pretty often, as long as my wife is okay with it. But yeah, it's really cool. St. Anthony Main Theater is great. They show some really nice indie films, including indie horror movies.
Okay.
So it's all of this really makes for a good balance.
Yeah, I love it. I could picture you as a runner. I did not picture you as the horror person, but that's why we do these, right? You get surprised. But good. And the Dumbledore snuck out there earlier, so I kind of figured that there was a science fiction. All right, let's pivot a little bit. If you weren't a physician, what would you be?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Hard to see myself doing anything. I think I would love to be teaching history. I think especially like medieval history, or something that I've really liked growing up, and even now it's like, I read a lot of books in like certain parts of like late medieval history in India and other things. It gives you perspective. It's kind of cool and fun. And so probably that, and maybe write historical fiction on the side for the fame and money.
Got it. And then the final question here. If you were a travel agent, where is one place that I should travel, and why?
Oh, okay. Okay. I think some of this is recency bias, but at least in the continental US, and I'm biased because I spent the last previously I spent 5 years in upstate New York. The Adirondacks is just great. It's just, I love the mountains, and so the Adirondacks in the fall is just beautiful. It's just like I love the fall here, and I've been up to Lake Superior and stuff, but it's just a different thing. There's this one time when I was up in the mountains with a friend, and we went hiking on a 1 weekday day off that we had, and we're up in this fire tower, and there's a clear line of demarcation between the green and the whole spectrum of red, browns, and yellows. And that sort of image is still stuck in my head and gives me a lot of joy. So I think, if you're into hiking, love nature, it's just a great place.
Yeah, that's awesome. I will admit, I have not been to the Adirondacks, but that does sound, you've sold it. That sounds awesome. I would love it. We do like to hike, and we like the North Shore here, certainly in the fall as well, for those colors, and getting up in those fire towers and being able to just see the landscape out there.
Oh yeah, that's pretty
versus the urban jungle that we tend to live in most of our time. So
yeah.
Well, thanks for your time. Like I said, that was the end of our Fellows in Focus here for you, Karan. I really appreciate getting to know you. And like I said, I learned some new things, and look forward to continue working with you for the rest of your fellowship here.
Yeah, thanks. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah. All right. Have a good rest of the day.